This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Listen up and welcome back to another episode of the Tapped In Sales Podcast, your podcast for beer distributors by beer distributors. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Bud, here with Moneyball Ross and Data Mike. And we have a special guest today, a friend near and dear to my heart, Matt Moberly from New Belgium and Bell's Brewing. Matt is the, what are we, Matt, now? We are the director of Bell's in Michigan.
My official title is Zone Director of Michigan for New Belgium Inc. So it'd be Bell's, New Belgium, and Kieran.
I love it. That's awesome. So Matt, thank you for joining us today. Tell the listeners a little bit about your background, where you come from, and then we're kind of get into some fun topics today.
I've been in the industry for about 25 years, started off in retail. That's when I met suppliers and distributors, and I was like, holy crap, you can have a career selling beer. This is freaking awesome. Prior to that, I have a master's in chemistry and had an epiphany one day. I'm like, I don't want to be a chemist. And so I was going to school out west at Washington State and university, and packed up my truck, drove, and was going to go to a northern Midwest college town. Ended up in Ann Arbor, realized very quickly I couldn't afford to live in Ann Arbor. And so I ended up in Ypsi, which is a little community next to Ann Arbor, and got a job at a store, a high-end gourmet grocery store that sold an amazing beer and wine selection and also sold homebrew supplies. And I was a home brewer at that point. So, that's kind of what got me into this business. I want to thank my brother for teaching me to homebrew. I really appreciate him, Mike.
That's awesome.
So it just, from that standpoint, background was analytical chemistry, and I just always have had a passion for data. My father was always like, crank that into your database, meaning like, look at the data, figure out the answer, try to solve it. My mom was a teacher. And so looking at ways to try to, not only analyze the data, but then try to communicate it and how to help other people understand it. And so I got my career started at Bell's about 2004. So about 22 plus years ago, street level sales rep, did an MBA at Michigan State, go green. And when I was done, I was like, hey, you better figure out something to do with me, because I'm going to get bored real quick. And so if you believe it or not, at 2008 is when we started a national accounts team at Bell's. And so pretty late in the game, the brewery was almost 30 years old at that point. And so
selling a ton of beer at that point too.
Yeah, a fair amount. Very unconventional approach to it, but certainly, there's some very large influential retailers based here in Michigan and also do business in Michigan. So we needed a better approach than kind of just an ad hoc, you live over in Grand Rapids, you can call on that retailer. And so, I did that for a number of years, built that team up, and obviously there was a lot of data involved. And so, that led the opportunity to create a business insights team. And so it was essentially, how do we sell more beer, save money, or improve quality through data? And that was an enterprise-wide endeavor. And we were doing some really cutting edge stuff with data visualization. And what's really exciting is when you see people get a little taste of the data that they work with, but presenting it in a way that they can better communicate and help others understand. It starts to snowball to a point where you run into problems where you don't have enough resources to give everybody what they want, because they're just so excited about doing more with their data. So I built up a business insights team, and then through 2021, I was head of sales and marketing for all of Bell's. So, my week was on a plane from Maine to Miami to San Diego, selling Bell's, interviewing distributors.
You guys are rolling out a bunch of new distributors then too.
Yeah. Our philosophy at that point was to interview literally everyone, even if it was practically impossible for that distributor potentially sell our brand, but it was an opportunity to learn as much as possible about every single market. And, you know, it was an awesome experience. It was a lot of work, but it was the right thing to do, because there's a lot of really passionate people out there that certainly wanted to sell the Bell's brand. And we wanted a chance to talk with them and kind of just gain their insights. And, sometimes it was, if we actually sign with you, we potentially could destroy your business at that point. I mean, we're talking really, really small distributors, cooler spaces that were no bigger than 20 by 20. But we talked to everybody. And then in 2022, we obviously merged with New Belgium, and what an awesome experience to see business from a very different perspective and a very different way of approaching how to sell beer. Certainly very different. And I would also say a refreshing opportunity to look at how sales and marketing work together. And Bell's was very, and sometimes we used to say marketing was a dirty word. We made beer and we hope people found it and liked it. And that was very traditional craft. And with New Belgium, it was certainly an opportunity to really change the way we communicated and presented the Bell's brands. And so, for the last several years, I've had the opportunity to focus solely on Michigan. Michigan is the number one New Belgium Inc. market in the country, by a pretty significant amount. We have some, largely because of the Bell's portfolio, but the groundwork that New Belgium laid here before integration really, if you look at scan data, it's Bell's and then Founders and New Belgium, and that's I think as a non-home market for New Belgium prior to integration, a testament to the work that was being done here before integration. So.
What's fun about you is there anybody who knows Larry Bell? I think his middle name is Unconventional, and
certainly.
You got to cut your teeth with him, and he gave you a ton of leeway and being able to build these little divisions up as you kind of grown in. That's one of the things that I love about you, and that's, I think, when you started the Business Insights division, that's when we ran across each other with some industry stuff we were working on at MBWA. You joined the BICC committee. I was there too, and that's kind of where we got to know each other too.
Yeah, certainly. You're 100% correct. Larry had a different way of approaching business, and to be perfectly honest, he and Kim Jordan had a very similar approach on how they started, and so I think there's a lot of synergy there. As you and I have known each other for numbers of years, being on MBWA and BICC, just really that pursuit over time of how can we make the industry better and what can we leverage in order, information-wise, data-wise, in order to be more efficient. Again, I go back to, can we save money, sell more beer, improve quality? And I think that, when you're doing one of those three things, if not more of those things altogether, you're probably doing the right things. So,
yeah. Well, as you are coming today from a distributor back, you're in their cellar today, literally, which is awesome.
This is the quiet spot, their wine cellar. They're very high-end wine cellar.
When we were prepping, when we were just getting ready to the recording, there was other people in the background. It's like, we got to get to a quieter spot. So, but I love this because you're out with a distributor today. They're one of your key distributors in your markets. You have been working, and Mike and Ross, this will be a fun story for you two to hear because it'll be the first time you're hearing it as we did a little prep call. You were working, Matt, on the 19.2 business in the New Belgium and in the Bell's world. And you were looking at distribution gaps. And I think this is an awesome story of how you think about data, how the industry should start to think about data, and marrying that data with behavior change. And what better than one of the packages that Ross and Mike love to talk about over and over again. So you were seeing an opportunity in 19.2s across the market. You went and did some research. How did that go? What did you utilize for tools? And then how did you start to talk about like distribution gaps differently? Because you did something really different this go around than like the classic gap analysis that we've all seen.
One of the questions that people usually say is like, what keeps you up at night? And honestly, what wakes me up in the morning is, how do I sell more beer? And so, with 19.2s here in Michigan, if I'm looking at the scan data, I have 9 of the top 10 SKUs in the state for craft. And so that's an unbelievable responsibility, but also creates an opportunity because I can walk into most accounts and they don't have 9 of the 10 being our brands. And so what I ask the question is that, it's really easy to go find a distribution gap. You can go find, pod gaps. You can run gap reports, pretty simple. But the question then becomes well, absent of additional information, every pod gap is equally weighted. And so I want to try to say, hey, what other information do I know about this account that can help me identify that at the end of the day, if I have a rep that's coming to a T in the road and their house is this direction and there's an account over here, or what if there was a better account this direction? How can I influence them to go? The easy route is to go towards home and make that last account call. If every pod is the same, then they're going to make that turn to go towards home, hit that last account. And so, there's some really awesome tools to be able to help us do that. I mean, we have data sets, how much information can we coordinate and incorporate, but, something like, we use Microsoft, so we're using Copilot, and they tap into a couple different AI tools. But the question was, help me identify every possible gap. So I load up a data set of all of our 19.2 distribution for both portfolios. I like to throw in a kicker of total absolute volume, regardless of package type, to kind of give me some additional information. But I've got class of trade type, I've got zip code, county, etc. And to say, like, one, identify all the gaps. Again, that's pretty easy. I think that's minimum expectation that a distributor should be asking of the suppliers, like, where are the gaps? The next question is, well, what are the better quality gaps to go after? And again, you can rank that by, here's the total volume for that account. So I'd say, like, you go from good to better. The question is, like, well, is there a possibility of a way to quantify the net future value of that placement? And so if I look at the last 90 days, can it be predictive of the next 90 days? And so using an AI tools to say, tell me what the potential future value over the next 90 days of this placement is. And what I did was I was able to generate a report where every single gap was then quantified by a net future value of that account, or of that placement, sorry. And so now I have the ability, if I'm talking to, say, a distributor partner, say, hey, here's a pod gap. Every supplier talks about pod gaps. I can talk about, like, hey, here's some ones we think are higher quality, and a high quality is a velocity ready account. Are they going to rebuy? Are they going to be sticky? And better yet, if not best, is to say, if you get this pod, here's how much volume. So think of, like, number of cases, revenue, or GP we can generate off of that potential placement. So with that, then I said, okay, if I've got this information, can I use that with my own team to create an incentive to say, go get me more pods, get these pods specifically. And now I'm going to incentivize you in terms of a competition on, if you curate that list to a set number of accounts, can you get the highest percent, like the highest net future value of those placements? So if you say, I've narrowed it down to 25 and I want you to get 10, I want you to get that account that's worth 13 future CEs, not 3. Absent of that, all pods are equal, right? But if I can quantify in some way the net future value of that placement, then can I direct them to try to go after not that account that's closest to home, but that one that may be higher value long-term for overall business? What was interesting when I presented this to our team was that they said, hey, most of these placements were not unknown to us, but what was unknown was the theoretical go-get value of those placements. And that really changed the mindset of, do I go get a pod just to check a box, or can I go after placements that I think will have a higher value in the long term for our business? And that's ultimately the behavior that I want to incentivize, is to say, yes, go get me pods, but 90 days from now, I'd love to have the ability to go back and look at the quality of those placements, the number of rebuys, and the number of total cases, because we all want stickiness. We know that, especially with the 19.2 business, it's turf warfare every single day in that cooler box, trying to find homes for new items. And then the competition is constantly battling to try to go get those placements. So if I can get something sticky, then that's going to help our long-term business for us as a supplier and our distributor partner.
I love it. You're speaking our language, Matt. I mean, we talk about that all the time with, we all, you call it the account close to home. We call it Bubba's back room, right? We all have a Bubba's account where we can get any pod we want. You just send it.
Yeah.
And it might end up in the back room. It might end up, in the FMBs if it's a craft. It could end up anywhere, but you got that placement. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the rep got paid, right? And it really had no stickiness. It really had no value to you as far as a value account. So I guess my question is, when we're working with distributors and a lot of our clients and help design out objectives, and from your camp designing out incentives, how do you design an incentive for those quantity or quality accounts where you're going to get the return that you're looking for? Do you design it a little bit differently and target specific accounts? Or tell me a little bit more about how you would design or go after an incentive for something like that.
Bud, I sat and listened to a presentation you gave at MBWA in San Diego a couple of years ago about, motivations for sales staff and distributors. And I think you're asking the question that frankly vexes our two supplier tier, the supplier tier and the distributor tier. And like, there's not a, like, this is exactly how you do it. I go back to my chemistry background, which is the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you form a test, you create an experiment, you run it, you see the results, and then you modify the experiment. And so I think that's the most important thing, is to try something and set the parameters that you can measure against it, and then say, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? So I'm using one example, like the experiment that I ran, I had some lessons learned. I did not provide enough time. I had too many other incentives or other motivators that were underway to get the focus that I wanted. And so, to be perfectly honest, the initial results of my experiment were underwhelming. And so if I had to do it again, I would certainly make it more of a priority, and I would have other things I would remove from the focus, and I would prioritize this. But I've run the data for those accounts, for those pods gained during that 30-day time period, and it's a well above average rebuy rate and volume rate. And so the methodology works. I just need to change the experiment to actually make it more effective. And I think that's a really important thing, because I had a conversation with it was an AB distributor, and it was the New Belgium portfolio. And there was a concern about some out of code product. And let's be honest, out of code product is something that all brands and all distributors deal with. And the distributor came to us and said, hey, this is what we believe is an issue. And when I compared it against the NBWA's efficiency report that comes out every 2 years, the dollar amount as a percentage of total revenue was well within, frankly, you would say high efficiency craft distributing. But out of code products is an expense that every distributor and supplier wants to be zero. And so we asked the question and said, well, what's going out of stock and where? And when you actually map it out and you look at the products, we were getting exactly what we were paying for, so to speak. Our distributor was getting the pods that were being asked of them, that were being rewarded based on a scorecard. But if you actually looked at the location and the brands, it was a lot of LTO items that were going as one case out, and 6 months later, one case being picked up. And if you mapped it out, you'd see, wow, that's actually not where a lot of craft beer is being sold. And so we were getting what was being asked. And what we said together is like, neither of us like this. We have a freshness program at New Belgium. And so we would rather go get 10 pods that buy 10 cases with a certain high percentage that never rebuy, or go get 5 pods that all rebuy. What do we want? And so let's reframe what our goals are here, because ultimately we're not trying to get pods. We're trying to get volume. We're trying to get sticky placements. And so I think, that's the investment in the time, is to go back and ask the questions, run the reports, analyze the data, use the tools. Mapping is I think is really important. It draws upon a lot of subconscious information that you already know about. If distributors, they know their markets from top to bottom, east to west, north to south. And when you actually throw the data on a map, it really starts to connect. And so I think mapping is a really big tool to be using when it comes to how do we target accounts? Or in this case, it was, how can we be better at setting some of our distribution goals together so that we're going and focusing on the right hotbed areas? Now, there's always going to be some speculation, right? We're always going to go in and try to say, like, can we try a little, is this an up and coming market? Can we test some things out? I think that's important. Test it, try it, validate it, repeat it, or move on. But I think that's a really strong trait of, I think, a data-focused distributor in 2026.
When you're working with those distributors, Matt, that are like, hey, we're not quite connecting with what we're trying to do, like that LTO, we're just continuing to send stuff that aren't really, maybe they're suboptimal, right? Maybe I'm getting the checkbox or I'm completing the outcome, but I'm not doing the best place. How do you feel like your role is as a distributor partner and the supplier to be like, hey, here's the better way to do this? Can you help model for the other suppliers that might be listening to this? Like, how do we get to change somebody or distributor's perspective around a challenge like that? Because I think that's a big opportunity that you do well, that other people in the space that are suppliers are like, you dumb distributors, you're just doing it wrong. Here's how you should do it. And like, it doesn't really land on the network that well. And I think you have a different approach that really kind of manage it better.
My experience has been over time, particularly on the craft side, is that when there's frustration with a distributor partner, it usually stems from a lack of communication and mutual goal setting. And I will also say, on a small supplier side, there is certainly a deficit of information. So they may be asking for some small suppliers don't even have VIP access, so they don't have the ability to actually look at data beyond what reports that are being generated. I think that's an important thing too. Is we all have our blinders on. If I look at scan data for Michigan, where Bell's is super strong, it's barely over 50% of our volume is being captured in syndicated scan data. So there's a lot of blind spots depending on the data sources you have access to. And so, really it creates a lattice where there's going to be gaps in this information, and you're trying to amass more information to help paint a more accurate or better picture. And so, when working with a distributor partner, knowing that the distributor has a different vantage point, they have a broader portfolio, they see more accounts than your brands are distributed in, that's very powerful if you have a partnership of collaboration with a distributor partner. Because ultimately, I generally believe we have a mutually aligned goal, which is to sell beer successfully and again, have it be sticky and repeat buy. So I think the advocation that I have is, when you can collaborate with the distributor, you can demonstrate that the information that is being shared is being used for that common mutually beneficial outcome. That has that has, it's a snowball, right? You get it, you demonstrate it. It's not being used as a hammer. It's being used as something that generates momentum. And, the most powerful thing that a supplier can have with a distributor partner is momentum. When you've got it, continue to capitalize on it. And I think that's, sometimes it takes a little bit to get that ball rolling, but if you can demonstrate that we're working together and we're mutually aligned in our focus goals, then you start to build that momentum and you get a lot more buy-in.
100%. I love that, getting the momentum. Everybody wants Mo on their side. And you're so right. And we're distributors are logistics companies, and the best ones out there are ones that happen to sell beer. Like that they actually stay focused on selling the product as well too. And they're not just distribution logistics organizations. And that momentum, that the science behind that excitement and the science behind momentum really does play a big role in the relationship and how much you can get done at a distributorship.
Well, I'll say the other thing that I think is a motivator for both the supplier and the distributor is what I call fold. It's fear of lost dollars. And when you can start to paint that potential go-get value and you say, hey, this potential placement is worth X number of cases, which is X amount of revenue, which is this much GP, and you start to paint that picture of that go-get value, that fear of lost dollar. I think we generally look at, we want this to be the rising tide raises all boats, right? But in a zero-sum game in the market, if I'm not making those dollars, my competition is. And so when we can more accurately potentially paint the potential of those go-get dollars, I think that is another very powerful motivator as well.
There's another story in your Bell's and New Belgium world around. So Bell's comes from a huge draft background, right? If I remember this right, like Bell's sells an enormous amount of draft beer compared to the package segment, and that your New Belgium team, when you merged and integrated the two together, they come from a much more package centric background. One of the things that you working on with clients or with your distributors is around a program that you've called Double Tap.
Yeah.
And the Double Tap program is really interesting around because it's data backed. There's a philosophy behind it. You come at this from rooted in a ton of knowledge around a brewery successfully having high velocity draft items and two distinct brands. But walk us through this Double Tap concept, where it started with, how did you find the opportunity, and now how do you continue to execute on the opportunity? Because this is something you've been working on for better part of 18 or 24 months now, I think, too.
I mean, it's something that's actually been successful for a long period of time. And so Bell's has, we've had two brands. We have Two Hearted, an American IPA, and we have Oberon, a summer American wheat beer. And so you asked the question about on-premise. Pre-COVID, 40+% of Bell's volume was done on the on-premise. We spent a significant amount of time really cultivating those relationships. Truly of the belief that the on-premise drives the off-premise. And so, certainly when COVID hit, that was like, oh shit. A lot of our volume all of a sudden, vaporized overnight. But Double Tap, what started was we lose all these Two Hearted handles when Oberon comes out. And, if you know both brands, you're like, I don't know that many people that drink Two Hearted and drink Oberon and would switch back and forth. They're very distinct, different beers. And so the question was, I said, is this actually true? And so I dove into the depletion data and said, it showed that we didn't lose that many. It felt like we did. We certainly had accounts that when we're pouring Two Hearted and then would, switch over to Oberon. But when we dove into the data, we certainly saw some accounts that did that, but there was actually quite a few accounts that just kept pouring Two Hearted and never brought on Oberon, or never poured Two Hearted or anything else from Bell's and then brought on Oberon. Oberon is such an iconic, it's crazy what Oberon does here in Michigan. It's crazy. But I asked the question, it was, if the Two Hearted and the Oberon drinker were the same, what data could I look at that would prove that out? And it was like, okay, I'll look at scan data. And so I've got, consistent Two Hearted selling. And if everybody switched from Two Hearted to Oberon, then the scan data would show just a cratering of Two Hearted. And the reality is that when Oberon comes out, that Two Hearted is like, okay, cool, I'm still going to drink my Two Hearted. Like, probably the only influence that happens with Two Hearted when Oberon comes out is we lose some ad features for a couple weeks. Maybe we see some of our display space go away. So the reality is that they're two completely different drinkers. So not only do we not see, the erosion of the Two Hearted handle when Oberon comes out, those accounts that actually were pouring both saw a significant combined total volume of both. So if I took the median Two Hearted account and the median Oberon account and I stacked them, I actually saw a twofold X, or so 4X total over the average, of each, or the median of each. So what it really showed was this is something that truly brings value to a retailer, that I'm not bifurcating the Two Hearted drinker when Oberon comes out. I'm actually bringing a whole other customer coming in that wants to drink Oberon and Two Hearted. And so, the sell story is, and everybody in Michigan knows this, a couple goes out on a date and one drinks Two Hearted and one drinks Oberon. They don't have to fight over who's got what. If you go to the account that's got both, they're both happy. And so it's proved itself out over time, and that the longer that accounts do the double tap, the longer it works. And so, really what it came from was an observation that then became a hypothesis, that then you created a scientific experiment. And so again, going back to that scientific method and saying, is there something here that works? And then that becomes a selling story. How do you actually translate this into something that brings value to not only our distributor partners, but also obviously our retail partners that benefit it from every single day as they're selling a significant number of pints. And so, like in Michigan right now, when Oberon and Two Hearted are out together, we have about a 50 share of the craft on premise. I don't know how many other markets where not only one brewery has as much volume share, but these two brands just really complement each other. So,
and for any like craft, loyalists out there, or craft, nut listen to the podcast, if you have not experienced, Oberon Day in Michigan, it is a national holiday for us Michiganders, right, Matt? I mean, it's incredible. True. People will take off work. They will go to the bar. They will leave. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. They will leave early.
Yep.
They will buzz off, because it always aligns with opening day, right?
Yep. It's always tied right roughly around that time. And
yep.
It could be 70 because it's Michigan, and it could also be snowing.
I'd say last year
year was
snowing. This year was pretty nice. But the crazy thing about Oberon Day, which is my favorite holiday, by the way, and one of my favorite beers, is no matter what time of day you go, it's always busy, and you see the shifts change. Yeah. So like if you go there, I'm saying at like 2, you see those early shifters leaving, stumbling out. And you're like, oh, damn, it's only 2:00. And they're leaving and a whole new fresh crowd comes in, and then they're leaving about 5 or 6 and a whole new crowd. And it's constantly shifting.
Vibe shift. Yeah. Yeah.
I love
what's great for us is, we set another record for the third year in a row at the cafe in Kalamazoo. But what's also amazing, and again, I work with our distributor partners, is that if I look at the 10 bars that are within 5 blocks, they all had record days too. And so it brings people out and celebrates beer. And so when I think of, iconic celebratory beer days, everybody loves St. Patty's Day, right? And in Michigan, you get St. Patty's Day, and then sometimes within the same week, you have Oberon Day, and it's a glorious celebration of beer. And I think that's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, you've created your own occasion, which we talk on this pod all the time, of just the occasion to get people out and about to enjoy beer. And you've created that occasion, which is benefiting the entire downtown area, a lot of other bars and restaurants too, which is amazing. And
When I go to Oberon Day, or when I walk around, what I see is a bunch of people that are mingling and they're celebrating with beer, and it is an awesome reminder that I work in an industry that's thousands of years old, that the last major innovation in beer was 1,000+ years ago with the introduction of hops. And um, I am a grateful and passionate steward of a legacy that I think of beer that is pretty freaking special. And I think more so now than ever, we need opportunities to get out and mingle and talk with each other. And if we can do it over a beer, um, I think that that's, again, you know, things that get me up every day excited. It's about how can we celebrate and just interact with each other, and can we have a beer? I mean, that's one of the things I love about, you know, being partners with so many of our distributors, is that we may have our disagreements. I mean, we certainly have different vantage points of the business, but we can get into a conversation, maybe a disagreement, and frankly, it may get heated and it may get loud, but at the end of the day, we can go have a beer together. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. I love that story about Oberon and Two Hearted, you know, because the myth that they compete, right? And to be completely frank, we competed against you guys in our market. We did not have bells, so we sold against it, and that was the conception. It's like, hey, well, you know what? If you have Two Hearted, you don't need Oberon, or hey, you have Oberon, why do you need Two Hearted, right? And we always try to get those handles. But how could that story relate to other, I wouldn't say brands, but like styles? Because one of the things we talk about too is like, you walk into an account and hey, I already have an IPA, I don't need another
Mm-hmm.
one, right? And I do believe like Two Hearted is a different type of IPA than, something that maybe even all day, right? All day, more sessionable. Uh, so when you, from the selling side, how do you compete with that too? We're like, hey, you might already have an IPA on tap, but I'm bringing you something a little bit different. And how would that relate to the Oberon and
Yeah.
Two Hearted story?
If you're selling craft beer, you have lots of IPAs. Let's be honest. Half of craft beer is IPA, and then half of IPA are hazies and juicies. And I think that's an important recognition, is to say, craft beer in many markets has become big enough that you have to start thinking about subcategories. So I can use the Bell's and New Belgium portfolio, Two Hearted Classic American IPA, and I can look at Juicy Haze, which is a very modern, juicy, hazy IPA. I think there's an opportunity for us as suppliers and certainly as distributors to help our retail partners, particularly in the on-premise, to actually maybe, and I don't want this to come off as arrogant, but have more discipline when it comes to the selection of the beers that they have stylistically. I've been into accounts where, there's way too many IPAs. I've been into accounts where there's way too many fruited beers and sour beers. And so one of the things that we would do at Bell's is we would make this a quad chart, and it was basically malt and hops. And we would make a hedonistic, mapping of a draft tower. And you'd be able to kind of just map out where different beers fell on that malt and hop. And what it allowed an account to see is they may be more overly saturated in one area or another. And most distributors that I know have a pretty diverse portfolio. And frankly, as a supplier of Bell's and New Belgium, we have a very diverse portfolio. But when you can show a supplier, that there are opportunities within their tap mix based on styles, that can create an opening for a conversation, and an opening where you can say, yeah, you can actually have multiple IPAs, but don't have too many. Just like you can have a lot of lagers, just don't have too many. Try to find some balance that allows you to maybe take advantage of that double tap scenario, where you have the ability to cater to a broader breadth of customer, rather than taking that IPA drinker and bifurcating them between two different brands. So I think there's an opportunity there. It's funny because, I think we all learn that the first rule of the beer business is beer is heavy. and that the transportation of beer is a major consideration when it comes to how we do business together. It was after many months of working at Bell's that I went to Larry and said, Larry, I know what the second rule of the beer business, and I apologize for my on-premise partners, but I said, a lot of crazy people own bars. And what I recognized was that they in the off-premise side, particularly when you have the ability to have UPCs, you can actually have and collect data and make really good decisions. But in the on-premise side, I remember getting a report from a data provider that was trying to say, yeah, we're collecting all this on-premise data. They had 5,000 different ways that Bell's draft business was being represented in their data set. I'm like, I can't do anything with this. And so I jokingly say crazy, but in reality, it was more of a deficit of information. And certainly now with more modern POS systems, and if you have the discipline with your staff to have them ring up the right things, you can really start to tap into the on-premise data and I think make really beneficial decisions for your consumers. And I think the other, when you have the data and you can start making those decisions, then you can actually come to the conclusion that to be an amazing beer bar and provide great value and customer service and selection to my consumers, I don't have to carry everything. I just have to carry the right things for my customers. And if I have the data, I can start to help frame out what those right things are. I think it's empowering for a retail operator when they have those insights to help them make better decisions. They generally have that on their food side. They know how much beef they order for their burgers and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the on-prem draft side, it seems to be a void of data still.
All those crazy bar owners on the independent side, Matt, are all crazy because they made a decision to buy the bar that they own in the bar that they own. Sitting at the bar drinking is how they made that decision to make that investment.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was just with one of our really good operators in Ann Arbor, and I spent a couple of days with him. And I can go back 20 years ago, and the account that he now owns was the bane of my existence because I knew the potential of this account. But the previous owners saw zero value in selling craft beer. And frankly, I'm here at Rave Associates in Ann Arbor, and it was their team that actually cracked that door open, and then frankly, changed the business for that bar. We were just having this conversation about, and this guy was a patron for 10 to 15 years and decided to buy the business. And we were having a conversation about selling pitchers of beer. And the thing is that we were doing Oberon Day there at his bar, and I watched a pitcher go by. I'm like, when did you guys start selling pitchers? And he's like, you mean that wall of pitchers over there hanging that have been here forever? Where they were hanging, I've literally never walked over to that part of the bar. It was always I walk up to the bar, get my beer, and go over to this side. And so he's like, yeah, we've been selling pitchers. And I go, do you sell craft beer pitchers? And he's like, no, it's usually for domestic lager. So I'm like, have you thought about why a beer like Oberon or Two Hearted might not be something that would work for you? And I said, when you've got a brand like Two Hearted and Oberon, which from a dollar scan value is like literally right by top, like number 11 and number 12 in total dollar volume. It's probably we could sell some pitchers. And I said, but I think there's some benefits to your business in terms of speed of service and, loss, beer loss, et cetera. I think there's some advantages here. At the same time, I think it also provides an opportunity where when folks get together and they're pouring each other beers and they're communicating and they're celebrating and they're all drinking the same thing, and that first pitcher runs out, they go, send me another one. And I think there's some a lot like advantages to that.
You and I were drinking it. We may or may not have been drinking at the bar one time recently talking about this. And that there's something to the pitcher relationship as a community of folks.
Yeah.
And this was one of the things that you were really passionate about, kind of like sake. And I think was the story that you were telling me is that you never pour your own sake. It is against, like, that would be bad form, not for you, but for your partners who you are drinking with, to allow your sake drink to go dry. And pitchers can have that same kind of communal effect as on a group of folks as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's something, I think the compatriot, kind of idea of pouring your friends a beer. And certainly there are examples in Asian culture where, it is certainly a ceremonial in how you pitcher or pour for, someone else first, etc. I think it just strikes me as something that, we need to focus more on. We think a lot about now the person that buys a 6-pack or a 12-pack or whatever and goes home and drinks by themselves. And we do need to celebrate getting together again and taking this product that has been a social lubricant for millennia and celebrating it. And what finer way to do that than with a pitcher of beer where you're drinking the same thing and you're pouring it for your buds or your best friends or whatever group you're in. And I think the other part of that too is that's pretty unique to beer. I mean, maybe you're buying a giant bottle of champagne or whatever else, but beer's got that, right? And I think that that's an important reminder that, beer is inherently social and we should be celebrating together. I just love the idea of, and it's like pitchers have been relegated to bowling alleys and things like that, but it shouldn't be. And again, for a long period of time, if craft was, sell it in a brandy snifter or whatever else and charge a lot of money for it. And I'm not saying that craft beer should be cheap, but, there are brands that have become big enough that, frankly, people, want to buy it in a pitcher. And I think there's a lot of advantages economically for all three tiers. And I think there's a really important thing socially when we're getting together and we're just mingling, and I think that that's something we're missing in a lot of in the last handful of years. I mean, we're obviously now World Cup is starting and people are going to be out celebrating together, and that's the momentum that we need to be talking about and how to carry that on of the excitement of going out and being with other people and talking with each other. And can we do it and celebrate over a beer? I think that's, again, people have been doing that for thousands of years. It is our obligation to continue that. And let's start with some pitchers.
Love it.
Well, I want to finish today, Matt, with your perspective and kind of what you get excited about. You talked about earlier, not about what gets me up or what keeps me up at night. It's about what gets me up in the morning. What gets you up in the morning for the next, when you look out to your crystal ball in the next, 3 to 5 years and the industry, what do we need to be focused on in an industry? What gets you up and ready to go? Kind of what we're in a tough time right now. We had a good Q1, a really weak April, got hit in the head again in May. Yep. We're halfway through June when we're recording this. Who knows where June's going to settle out leading into the 4th of July. Talk me through what you're thinking, what you're getting excited about, and where you think the industry is going.
If I think, further out, but you and I have been on this committee, BICC, for a number of years, and I've never seen more excitement at NBWA amongst the distributor partners on how to leverage AI tools. And I think they're exciting because they can be very beneficial in better understanding, the nature of your business and seeing opportunities. What I've actually, what excites me though is how do you meld what sometimes is perceived as this will give us all the answers to a business that's built upon relationships that is inherently human. And so I think that's something for us to keep in mind is that in the value chain of, from beer being produced the logistics side of the value chain to the communication side of the value chain to the human side of the value chain, is how do those all interact when we now have, very powerful tools giving us more insights and saying, how then do I build that with my team? I think it would be very easy to say, this will solve all of our problems. And the data just says exactly, who should be buying what, and this should be really easy. And we can, we can bypass a lot of the human component of it. Yet we all go out into the market every single day and have it reinforced to us that there is what we might perceive, from our own viewpoint, as irrational decision making. Taking some time to understand why things are the way they are and how we can influence them are really important. So just like when we're leveraging these new tools to give us these insights to help us better understand our business, how do we more effectively communicate that within our own teams, within our own tier, and through our tier partners to try to ultimately make the marketplace better for us all? And that's actually where AI doesn't scare me in the sense of, is it going to take my job? It just reinforces to me that there's a lot of work to be done on how we embrace and utilize it, because it's not going to eliminate us all. Again, this is a relationship business that has been based on the passing beers across the bar and interactions, and the transportation from beer from a manufacturing facility to a retail facility for thousands of years. And I guarantee you that the Egyptians making their alcoholic beverages were writing things down, trying to figure out how much they should make next time this year based on this festival. Like, it's the same thing over and over and over again, and it's been going on. It's just more complex now, but people are always involved. And so rather than thinking about eliminating people, it's how do we embrace the connection between what the data is saying is, giving us this insight, and how do we get that connection to the human side? So that's the stuff that actually really excites me about AI. Is not about the data so much as what do we do with it?
Yeah. And it's always finding the next insight that will actually mean something, right? To move the business forward. That's what you've been so careful about, gracious about with your distributor partners, how you think about it is that we're going to use this information to move the business forward. It's not just information for information's sake. And there's a lot of folks in the world, not just in our industry, but across the world, that have information for information's sake with no process to use it, no way to use it, no even opinion about how to start to use it, or they just want to give it to you and be like, yeah, you go figure it out. And like, you are always taking, and your background makes total sense with your chemistry, how your dad taught you and how your mom taught you, what her background of a teacher too is like, how do you actually get to change somebody's perspective? If we can change somebody's perspective, they can change the world for us or with us 100%. So awesome time today, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Really, really appreciate you. If anybody wants to get in touch with Matt, you can email us at info@vxptech.com. That's info@vxptech.com. Matt, I'm not going to make you give out the email. I will filter those for you if people want to get in touch with you.
I appreciate that.
Yep. So hit us up there. If you're looking to see Matt in person, he's in the Michigan area. I can connect you guys, and then y'all can go from there. Matt, cannot thank you enough for joining. If you like what we're doing, continue to listen, subscribe, and share with a friend. You'll get to hear more from industry experts like Matt and all of his background. We had to have Ross is going camping this weekend, so we had to bolt. He says, bye, Matt. Sorry for the Irish accent on his side as well. But, 'tis the season in the summertime. We're going to have a little lackadaisical stuff. So, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today. Yeah. Mikey, you awesome. Rock. You boys have a good weekend, and cheers.
Cheers.